Okay, hi everyone. I'm Likita. Welcome to Dart and Flutter series. And this is the second video of our series. And in this series, we'll be learning about the variables and the data types and about the null safety. Okay, in the last video, I have told about this Dart pad. Dart pad is the one of the web tool that we use. It's like a compiler where we can write the Dart code and practice ourselves. So, as a beginner, it's a recommendation to use or get started with the Dart pad and learn few basic things and then jump into the actual real world Flutter and a Dart thing. If you could see this or observe this properly, we have a method called a main, and in C languages and in other languages, we oftenly see this method, and this method is an entry point for a program to run. When I try to hit a button run, the first point or the first method or function it search is a main. So that automatically search for this function and it's try to run what is inside this. It try to run what are the things that we have written inside it. I think you're clear about the main method. So let's talk about variables. So what is variable? Variable is it's like a container where we can store the values that we want and we can reuse it later. So the overall concept of variable is simple. Just for storing something, we are creating it so that we can reuse it somewhere. In Flutter, if you want to create a variable, it always starts with the syntax of a type and a variable name and a value. So I'll just write it again. When you want to create or define a variable, usually it starts with a type of the data that you are storing, and you give a variable a name. You give a variable a name, and later we'll use an assignment operator for assigning a values, and make sure that it always ends with the semicolon. So let's write the code and see how to create a variable of integers. Let's imagine you want to store a value, a number. So what is the type of it? It can be int, it can be double, it can be anything. Okay, let's write a type called int and give a variable a name called number 1 or something, and let assign it to the number 2 and close it or end it with the semicolon and try to print this number. So to print this number we can just use a keyword called print, and what do we have to print? We have to print a variable called number 1 and end it with a semicolon and try to run this function. So what happened, it searched for the main method, and what is inside the main method, we have first given a variable. First we have created a variable, it's like a container, and the container name is number 1, and which we have given a value called 2, and we are trying to print that, and the output we are getting is 2 here. So I think you got the idea how to create a variable, right? So always when you want to create a variable, it always starts with a type. It could be even string. So if you want to store a name of a user, you can simply give a type of what you are storing, that is string, and you give a name to the variable, and you tend to give a username called it could be Ligita. And if I try to print a username, and if I run the program, so of course at the output will get a first as the number, that is 2, and the second it is Ligita. Same way we can write for boolean is done, which is equals to true, and we can do for double. Double usually it can be, usually it is a decimal number, that is 3.14. It can be a good number. It is a decimal number. We can just print that both. So let's copy the same thing and let's print both numbers. One is done, which is a boolean. It have to be an output of true, and second one is an double, which is an decimal number which have to give a output 3.14. So here it is. So I think you got an clarity about how to create a variable. So whenever you want to create, so the main purpose of variable to store a value. How do you create a variable? So the syntax is simple. First you write the type and you give a variable a name and you assign it by giving the assignment operator, and you assign a value, whatever the value. If the value is a string, if the value is a string, the data type will be string. The type is string. If it is a true or false, it means it should be a boolean. Uh, as for now, you have learnt about how to create a variable, how to store a variable, and based on the values should be changed or it should be kept constant. We can use two keywords for that. I mean, whatever the value that you have stored, right? Based on that, you want to change the variable or you want to keep it constant. We have few keywords that we can use, which can help us to keep the values constant in sometimes which we wanted, or keep the values changeable when we need it. So the keywords are const and final. In the moment when we use a keyword called const and final, as the name says, whatever the values that you are assigning to that variables are constant. It doesn't change. Example, let's say const int, you are storing an integer, giving a name age and 20 and semicolon. And when I try to print age and semicolon, and very important, we have to assign the value that is missing, so it's throwing an error. So let's run the code and the output should be 20. Yeah, as expected the output is 20. So let's change the age to 25. Let's reassign it to 25, and if I run the code, which have to throw me an error because as the name says constant, the value that you are storing here is constant. It's like you have created a container and you have stored the value, and that container is completely sealed. You can't change or do anything with it. Okay, the same way also the final keyword also does the same thing. If I replace const with the final, let's create a final, and here let's use a string and name equals to Alex, and let's try to print the name. And if I run the code, in the place of age it have to be 20, in the place of name it have to be Alex. And if I try to change the name to Sarah, and if I run, there should be an error because as I told, final and const is the same thing. Once if you assign the value, you can't change. Okay, but there's a little difference that you have to know about the const and the final. That is, the value what it is been assigned, it will be assigned during the runtime in when you use the final keyword. So when you use the final keyword, the values will be assigned during the runtime. But when you use a keyword called const, the values here is been assigned even before the program is run. So the best example I can show here is, okay, let's create a variable called time, which is equals to date time dot now, and let's try to print the time, and let's run the code. So the moment when it compiles this, what will happen, it will give the current code, current date and the current time, everything. And it's a final. Since we use a keyword final, this can't be changed, and it runs. And this value, what it is happening, it has been assigned during a runtime. If I replace this with the const keyword, and if I try to run, we'll get an error, because usually when you use a const keyword, the value will be assigned firstly. It is not assigned during a runtime. This is the major difference between the const and the final keyword. Okay, let's say you want to create a variable where you want to where the values what you are storing have to be changed later. That you're not keeping the values constant. That you want to reassign with something. In that condition, we can use a two keyword. One is var, and another one is dynamic. See, when you use these two keywords, this both keyword doesn't even care about what data type of the data that you are storing, because it is reassignable, which can change the data type also. Example, let's take var, and you are storing a name, and you are reassigning that name to Alex. And let's say if I just print the name, and the output that we expect is Alex, right? The output will be Alex. So let's imagine, see, as I told, the output is Alex. So let's rename it again to 20, and if I try to print the output will be 20 as expected. But I'll show you one more thing. Let's say the var equals to Alex, and if I try to print an output for a variable name, and if I run, what will be the output? The output will be the value that is Alex. Okay, so let's rename this name to 20. Take a moment and think what will be the output. The output will be an error. The error, because see, I'll give you two difference. We have just now saw the two difference. One is, if I write var, I'll give it the age, and if I write age equals to 20, and also again the age equals to, if I give some other string value also, and if I try to print a age value, semicolon, if I try to print a age value, the age will be ABC, which is taking a string and also even a number. It is because, observe the both things. Here you have already initialized the value. You have type inferred the value as string. So you are telling, so when the dat goes through each line of the code, so it sees and it understands it by default it takes, okay, the value, the type of the variable value name is string. But in this condition, when the dat sees this variable age, which doesn't have any value, it takes this as a dynamic. Dynamic means this value could be anything. It could be number, string, boolean, double, anything. So this is what the difference, the little bit you have to concentrate on. This next is dynamic. Dynamic also doesn't care about what type you are storing. One of the best example is, let's age equals to 20. Here it is little different than var, because var basically depends on whether it is type inferred or it is not. So if I print this age, and if I run the program, the output will be, of course it will be 20. And if I try to change the age to some string, and if I run the code, the output will be ABC. That's the difference between the var and the dynamic. Even you have type inferred here, it is able to change that type in the next row. So this is the difference between var and dynamic, but both does the same thing, that it can be able to rechange or redefine the values again. Okay, as for now, you have discussed about the variables and what are the keywords that can be used on those variables if you want that variables to be constant or if you want to change it later. Based on that, you can use the keywords. Now let's talk about something called null safety, and this has been brought in Dart 2.0. So null safety, the whole concept is so simple. The variables cannot be null. So here the whatever the variables we are assigning, right, that the values of the variables, it cannot be null by default. So by default, you can't you can't assign the value to be null. Example, if I try to create a variable, called age, and if I make it or we are assigning it to the null, which throws an error. See, the value of the type null cannot be assigned to the variable type int. So which means that you can't assign or give the variable the null directly, you can't give. But there are some conditions, there are some scenarios, there are some situations where the value of the variable can be null. Example, sometime when you fetch the data from the API, the initial value of the variable will be null. So to tell it's null in the initial, we can just use a question mark. When we use a question mark, which tells that this value, this variable value will be null for now. If I how do I check it? Is just print age, and say if it is equals to null or not. If it is equals to null, the output should be true. As expected, the output should be true, yeah, which means that for now it is null. So when you use the question mark, which is taking as a null. Okay. Okay, let's think of a situation called situation where you have the variable called age, which is a null, and let's create one more variable called new value or something, and which is equals to assigned to the age, and this age, what it has been null. But what we are doing, we have created a new variable and we are trying to assign that null value, but we have to tell that this value is not null. So what happened, initially it could be null, when the moment it reached here, it maybe we got the value or something, and we have to tell this value is not null. So how to tell this value is not null? We just have to use the assertion operation. So what we have to use, an assertion operation. We just have to insert an exclamatory mark at the end of the variable. This tells that this variable is not null. And you also should be aware about the keyword called final. So sometimes what happens, there is a time where the variable will be created and you have not assigned the values initially, but you are 100% sure, and if you want to tell that 100% the value will be assigned to it at the later stage, just you have to wait. Usually that happens in the class. Quickly I'll write an example. Don't worry about how to write the class and all. In the future videos we'll see how to do that. For example, let's give a class a name example, and let's have the variable called size or something, size, and here we don't know the value. If you don't assign, okay, here let's imagine you don't know the value, or you have not given the value value to the variable, and when you call this method, method, and here you can able to give a value 20. So what it is basically telling is the concept is super simple. Okay, we can't be used. Very important. The error here is, see, we have used a final keyword. So when did I tell we can use a final keyword which is not assignable? So it is not a final. Just remove it. It can't be a final. It can't be final. So now it's throwing an error. If I just replace it with the late keyword, and it removes the error. So what it is basically telling is, we are telling that we will get an number. I mean, 100% will assign a value to the variable size, but we need a little time. But before the program ends, we'll definitely give a value. So this size variable value has been reassigned here. Okay, let's talk something important. Let's say when you're dealing with, as I told, how do we create a variable? We know how do I create. I'll just write the type. I'll give a name to it. Then I'll assign the value, and that's it. This is how we usually create a variables, right? So the next thing is, when you're dealing with a string, you have to know one concept, that is string interpolation. So what does it mean is, sometimes there will be condition or a statement where we have to print a statement like my name is, and we have to include a variable. So when there is a condition, we have to include a variable in a string. We'll use a $sign and a variable name. If it is a simple, just use a variable. If there is a complex, use a curly braces with the name and end with the semicolon, and try to run this. So the output will be my name is, and the name here is a variable, that is a star. It is called interpolation. And the next thing is, sometimes we have to know what is a type of the data in the runtime. Example, if you have two variables like number 1, let's give some number, and we'll have a double, which is number 2, which is a decimal number 2.5 or something. So how do you know when you add num1 and num2? So what do you think the data type will be? So let's say, if there is a condition, you have to know what will be the output of number 1 plus number 2 addition. What will be the type? If you want to know that, we can simply, it can be known using two things. One is, we can just write dot run time type, and if I run the program, the runtime type of, when you add both, will be double. Okay, either this way, or I can be simply check that using something called is command. I can just write, I'll just remove this. I'll go back here and remove this also. So number 1 plus number 2, and you are checking, is this equals to int? Is this I'm asking them that if you add these two number, is this equals to int? Will we get an runtime error as if int? If it is true, it will be get an output true or else false. So which means it is false. Yeah, the output that we get is a double, which is, of course, it will be false.